right, welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the City of Delray Oaks City Council, Tuesday, January 28th, 2020. Welcome into our new decade at 6 p.m. Charlie Benson Memorial Hall. Kim, could you please do roll call?
Councilmember Gagliotti?
Here.
Councilmember Littell? Councilmember Getzel? Here. Vice Mayor Clark? Here. Mayor Kerr?
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. Susan, can you start us with the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Reverend Hallam, please.
Thank you. Almighty God, thank you so much for this new year. Thank you for this city and its people and its government. Please bless everyone in this room tonight and provide your wisdom for every thought, every word, every action. And thank you for your presence here. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open up with public comments. General public comment must deal with matters subject to the jurisdiction of the city and the council that are not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to address the city council on matters not appearing on the agenda may do so now. The public may comment on any other matter listed on the agenda at the time the matter is being considered. There's a time limit of no more than 3 minutes. No action will be taken on matters brought up under this item, and all comments will be referred to staff. I would invite you to come up.
I don't want to argue too far about that. My name is Mary Solsing. I live at 14 Hillwell Place. And I'd like to begin by thanking the council and staff for the public works projects and the safety improvements that you've made over the past couple of years. I really appreciate them. I especially appreciate the standard with the light, or excuse me, with the speed meter on it. I think it slowed things down considerably. I know it slowed me down. But I'm here tonight on a different matter. I'm actually here to request further safety improvements on Portola. I'm a walker, and I really enjoy being in a city full of walkers. I enjoy meeting my neighbors. I enjoy the people who are walking their dogs on leashes. But on Portola, it creates a congestion problem where there are cars parked on both sides of the street, and you get 1 or 2 or 3 or half a dozen pedestrians and maybe a dog or two, and then a car coming in one direction and another car coming in the other direction. It's congestion. Now, I've been here for a while, and it seems to me that we used to be a bit more courteous, and that actually now drivers are tending to be a bit more aggressive. And since I'm into bearing my soul to you tonight, I find that as someone else is aggressive, I tend to react in kind. So I'm here tonight to ask the City Council to consider making some improvements on Portola. And I don't like to come with just the complaint to leave it into the air, but I have some suggestions. One of them, of course, is to provide uniform sidewalks where the dogs and the people could mosey along. Now, Mr. Pick, who I met with a few days ago, told me that that would be the residents' financial responsibility, but I think the city could contribute if you were to so choose. But I realize that that is a very expensive and probably the ultimate correction for the problem. I thought of a couple of other things, one of them being to restrict the parking to one side of the street, and that probably would not be met with a lot of grace by the residents on Portola. And a third one to be to turn Portola into a one-way street, and that probably wouldn't be met with a lot of grace by anyone who drives on Portola, including myself. And I finally kind of settled on and would like to bring to your attention the idea of painting a striped line, a white broken line, a dotted line, if you will, down the center line of Portola. Now you might ask why. Well, what is that going to do to improve safety? Well, I think that just as the meters for speed have improved safety through the awareness of the drivers, that a dotted line down the center line would improve safety through the awareness of those people parking cars, the drivers that are transferring back and forth, the walkers, not the dogs. You know, I don't think they'll pay any attention to the striped line. Why am I concerned? You know, I think that as this congestion goes on, there's going to come a time where there may be an incident involving a pedestrian, maybe involving a dog, maybe a sideswiped car, maybe 2 cars playing bumper tag in the middle of the street. I don't want to see that, and I'm sure the council doesn't any. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, Mary.
Good evening. I want to piggyback on what she just said. It's there are a lot of citizens have band together to do a lot of good things in Delray Oaks, enhance the quality of life for our residents. Special nod to Ron Fritchie and the citizens who make personal efforts to beautify our city. That's the good stuff. Now the not so good. I'm kind of like her, the good and the not so good. I was prompted to investigate the facts behind Mayor Kerr's public accusation made in November City Council meeting of unethical behavior by Councilmember Gagliotti. I found the accusation to be ill-conceived. Minutes of the Monterey One Water Recycled Water Committee, which is an open to the public meeting, is where John made a motion which was unanimously passed to the Monterey One Water Board for discussion. That indicated that there was more than just himself who thought the matter worthy of further consideration. As was evidenced by numerous public testimonies in that November City Council meeting, there are differences of opinion regarding desalinization and the pure water expansion. Further, since the report in question was commissioned by Monterey One Water, it was completely legal and within its discretion to delay release to the public while it reviewed the report, which, by the way, none of the committee members had seen, so they didn't know what it said. There was nothing unethical in what Councilmember Gagliotti proposed. You might disagree with him, but he did nothing unethical. In a separate matter from the December meeting, I was surprised by the apparent conflict of interest between you, Mayor, and your relationship with Landwatch, which has now sued the city. On your campaign website, you had proclaimed your proud membership in Landwatch. Within 24 hours of my bringing this to your attention, I noticed that it was removed from your website, the reference to Landwatch. But it does cause me to wonder exactly where your allegiance lies. Are you with Landwatch, or are you for our city of Delray Oaks? You made a proposed amendment to the housing element, which denuded the housing element, removing 3 of 4 possible areas for the city for affordable housing. It sounded more like it could have been drafted by Landwatch than yourself. Your offer would leave additional dwelling units as the only truly viable alternative for our city. Now, while additional dwelling units may be a very reasonable way to address it, it certainly shouldn't be the only way to address the affordable housing element. So I am not alone in the city in believing it's possible and critical that our community oversees the environmentally, socially, and economically responsible development of the former Fort Ord property to include affordable housing. The council voted in the best interest of the city to move on and approve the housing element. You, Mayor, being the only dissenting vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Any other public comments?
Hi, I'm Alice Green. I live on Saucedo Avenue. I fully support Landwatch's lawsuit, sorry to say. I think they're right. unfortunately, because the city has designated, parcel 2 and 3, the 17 acres, and down there at their park is the alternatives. I would like to propose, okay, obviously, I think we all agree on additional dwelling units as a good thing. I don't know of anybody that doesn't think that's a good idea. So that's one thing. Another idea I had was, and this entails a lot of issues and could be highly problematic. Nevertheless, in the light industrial area, rezone, redo, put something there. That seems to me that that's something to think about anyway. I'm just presenting that as an idea, as a way to not, because those are both such sensitive ecologically areas that it would be a shame to start building on them, with the watershed issues and everything. So that's my idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice.
Hello, my name is Douglas McKenzie, and I live on Saucedo. And I was going to defer my comments until the end. However, given what I've just heard, I would like to suggest, with your indulgence, that the item 11B1, to wit, the conference with legal counsel regarding the existing litigation, be moved to old business, which I don't see on your agenda anywhere, but it's conventional to have old business. I don't see it on here, but that's my suggestion.
Thank you. It's a closed session item because there's a legal discussion that happens.
I understand that, but given the discussion that we just heard about the allegations from Mr. Allion here, I think it's appropriate.
Thank you. Everyone has the right to express their opinions during public comment. So, anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Please.
Gary Krieger, 3 Gwendell, and I would just like to note that I don't think that being a Landwatch supporter or any other organization supporter necessarily is incongruous with serving the best interest of the city. I think that I sat through 3 hours at the Planning Commission. I also voted against the housing element because, quite frankly, it seemed as though there was a high likelihood we were going to end up exactly where we're at. And I thought that there was probably a better way forward, which my understanding is what I think the mayor tried to do. I think that we could have found an interim solution and come back around to the four-doored land in the future. Didn't think it had to be addressed right now. There did seem to be an issue about wanting to get the housing element approved, which I thought was a good idea to get the money. So just wanted to look, there is a different perspective on that, and I appreciate the efforts of trying to get something through that is going to stay out of court, get her some money, and four-doored land's not going anywhere. We're going to do the right thing with it when the time comes, and it is going to come, and we are going to develop it in an appropriate manner. It's going to happen. It's not going to stop there empty forever, but it didn't have to happen by 31 December. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Ken Rutherford, Via Verde. I just want to also indicate that I was not present for the last council meeting, but was present for the Planning Commission meeting talking about the housing element. I think there was some discussion at that time about the letter from Landwatch and the very good legal points they made and how we were trying to avoid litigation. I spoke at that meeting, several people did. The only person that reached out to me after I spoke and expressed my concern was the mayor, who apparently watched that Planning Commission meeting and asked what my concerns were, enlisted my assistance in talking about those concerns. But before I get into the bad part, I want to get to the good point. We had a coffee with the mayor earlier this month where we talked about safety on the roads. And I brought up the fact that I'd like to have more safety on Via Verde and also on Rosita, because we walk up those streets and it's pretty dangerous as well. So we had a really productive, good meeting then with the citizens and the mayor. But I just want to say that the mayor is the one reaching out to us and representing the city. And I was so impressed with Landwatch and their letter at that planning commission meeting that I went on their website, I joined Landwatch, because they provide information to our city leaders to help them in your negotiations with Ford. Am I not correct on that? I'll leave that open for your discussion, but I just think that, I'm sure all of you have run to be on the city council or as mayor because you have the best interest of our city at heart, and I hope that that continues.
Thank you, Ken. Any other public comments? All right, we're going to move on to the presentation, the swearing in of Officer Christopher Moore. Chief, please.
Mayor, City Council, thank you very much. City Manager, haven't been before City Council in a while, and it's good to be here for something good, not some report or some closed session or something crazy like that. We are still working really hard to get our city, you folks, the best police department that you can have. As the commander said, as we closed out 2019, Commander, how many years have you been here? 24 years. He said that this has been the best year for police services in the city of Del Rey Oaks, and I'm going to take his word for it because I've only been here 21 months. And we have closed more cases, arrested more bad guys, and provided more intelligence to surrounding agencies than we've ever done. We are currently working a very, very large burglary case that spans several jurisdictions, and we are responsible for catching the main perpetrators in that case and giving information and solving cases for other jurisdictions. And the reason I mention that is because of the quality of officer that we're now hiring after we've merged with the Airport Police Department and quadrupled our training budget and provided the very best equipment on the peninsula to our officers and updated our facilities and our vehicles and really stressed professionalism. We're starting to get a better quality candidate and a better police officer to serve the city. And our newest officer is not an exception to that. He has come here to be with us, and we couldn't be more proud. So I call him Chris. His full name's Christopher, but I'm referring to him Chris. Sorry to make this a little bit shorter, and you'll appreciate that. Chris was born and raised in Gilroy, California. He graduated Gilroy High School in 2008. He completed his Associates of Arts in Administration of Justice at Gavilan College in 2011. And in 2015, he graduated San Jose State University with a Bachelor of Science in Justice Studies. He began working in the Monterey Peninsula area, first with Seaside and then with the Pacific Grove Police Department in 2016. And in October 2019, we hired him here as a reserve officer. He went through our field training program. He did outstanding, and probably a testament to that. If you take a look, we have officers that are holding over from day shift, and we have supervisors and officers who have come in on their days off just to show their appreciation and their recognition to Chris. So he's been an outstanding addition. Those of you who met Officer Baum when Officer Baum left us and went to Pacific Grove Cop, this is our new cop. He's a millennial. He does all our computer stuff, and I don't understand. So I'm exceptionally pleased to have him. So I'm going to ask Chris to come on up here and take the oath of office. I want you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Christopher Moore,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
to support and defend the Constitution of the United States
to support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the state of California
and the state of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
To bear true faith and allegiance
to bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the state of California.
and to the Constitution of the state of California.
I take this obligation freely,
I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and promise to,
Faithfully discharge
faithfully discharge
the duties of the office.
faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
All right, one of these days. Along with the officers who are here, Chris has a couple of guests. So I would like you to introduce the special folks that you have here.
So tonight, my mother, Francine Moore, my father, Patrick Moore.
Nice.
Would you like to come up for a photo? Now's the time.
Who's going to put your back? Mom. So we're going to have Mom.
Mom can't operate the camera, so I.
You're okay.
And I want you to know I didn't photobomb that photo.
Nice.
Took a lot, but I. Chris, do you have anything to say, or?
Welcome to be here.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
And then thank you for supporting us and letting us get good guys like Chris.
The cake outside is in recognition of Chris joining us, so please have one. It's always a nice way to start. All right, we're going to move on to staff reports. Turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. During the holiday, as Chief mentioned, during the holidays, our police department apprehended a robbery suspect and recovered significant amounts of property that has resulted in solving numerous crimes around the peninsula from various jurisdictions, and just really not only is a great indication of our department's capabilities of keeping us safe and our community safe, but really showing just where we've raised the bar, thanks to Chief and the work of the department, as the reputation of this department, the capabilities of this department regionally. A lot of the property has been returned to the owners, and other crimes being solved. So terrific work by PD. So in spite of working diligently with Land Watch of Monterey County, during the city's housing and element development, the city was served with a lawsuit from Land Watch. The city attorney will brief the council in closed session. Having said that, and in spite of all of that, the city has adopted its first housing element since 1992, submitted it to the state, and we're really excited about that. Public Works continues to make improvements to reduce erosion and flooding during rains. Ron, you may have seen a new dump truck driving around the city that Ron proudly drives. It delivered 6 tons of gravel to areas needing improved drainage in the city. He's built awnings for equipment storage down in adjacent to the Public Works container down in our Public Works yard. He is working to install drinking fountains in our park in 2 locations, one by the baseball field, the other where the bathrooms are in between the two restrooms. It'll have a bottle filling station. It'll be ADA compliant. So we're pretty excited about that. And we're also looking at the Lion to see how we can get that puppy working again as a water fountain. Ron's also been working on the baseball field, as many of you have noticed over time. We're talking with Seaside Pony League about starting practices there, and we're hoping to see families and teams playing out there this spring. City staff are assuming the lead from FORA as FORA rapidly dwindles in terms of capability and size in our guiding our meetings with the California Native Plant Society, city staff on South Boundary Road. It's becoming clear to city staff that CMPS unfortunately seeks to delay or prevent the city's largest capital project. We have asked them directly what they'd like with regards to the area, and the only focus is basically on the area where the road is. So that's what they want the road not to happen. Which is terribly unfortunate, as this is removing a terrific option for us to put a safer roundabout there at the intersection of General Jim Moore and South Boundary Road, but it is what it is. Staff is obtaining bids to place solar panels on City Hall. The mayor and I attended a new mayors and council members conference last week in Sacramento, which was a terrific learning experience for all, I think. Staff has met to begin reviewing the mid-year budget, and we will meet again ahead of the Finance Committee meeting in February. Staff plans to present the mid-year budget to the City Council at the February City Council meeting. Staff met with area city managers to discuss a response to the revised growth forecasts and water demand document that the Water Management District has produced. And when I say Water Management District, the district manager, David Stolt, has produced. His board has not approved the document. He's reached out to managers for input, and we are discussing it collectively, and we'll be providing a response, which I will share with the council and the public in due course. Staff spoke with HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department in Sacramento, regarding our planning work program based on the adopted housing element. Staff also met with Denise Duffy and the chair of our planning commission, Scott Donaldson, about the work program, and we're excited about where that's going to go. Staff continues to negotiate with two development teams regarding the development of city's Fort Ord parcel. Councilmember Gagliotti and I met with Erin Harwain of Denise Duffy and Associates, who's going to present tonight on the habitat plan, to analyze where endangered species are located on our Fort Ord property. She's going to discuss that tonight. We also visited our economic development consultant in Sacramento to discuss where potential development might take place on the parcels, so that we could have some sense of understanding of what the impact might be on endangered species, so that we can start to have some sense of what our planning assumptions might be to develop cost models for a habitat conservation plan. More on that a little bit. The Spring 2020 Street Slurry Project is out to bid. It was in the weekly. Bids are due February 13th, and we'll bring those to council for award February 25th. The streets that are going to be slurry sealed are Portola, Work, the cul-de-sacs off of Angeles, and Villa Verde. And staff has completed an audit of our police services contract for our first year of services to the airport, which is actually 9 months of the last year, and provided those to the airport. And lastly, the Citizens Action Group met, and topics discussed there included becoming a Tree City USA, which staff is working to bring to council in either March or April in conjunction with Earth Day to earn that designation as Tree City USA. And we're going to have an exciting program that will highlight the oak tree replenishment program that CAG's been working on with a variety of residents in our town. Any of your questions? That completes my report.
Sure, thank you. So everything I've been doing at Fora was going to be discussed in detail with the presentation. So I'll move on from there. In Watermaster, the board directed, Seaside Basin Watermaster, the board directed Bob Jenks, who is our Watermaster, to go out and find money for projects or for excess water, to buy excess water. I'm going to take a little license here to kind of explain why or how that all kind of transpired. The basin right now is currently overdrafted by 43,800 acre feet. We have regularly been taking more water, the consumers on the peninsula, have regularly been taking more water out of the basin than the basin has been able to naturally recharge, to the tune of about 1,500 acre feet per year. And we've been doing that for well over 25 years. So there is an empirical measure that the basin has generated or has come up with. It's called the Predictive Groundwater Elevation, and it's a measurement of a sounding in a number of our wells. The predictive or a predictive groundwater elevation, which would prevent saltwater intrusion into the seawater basin, is 17 feet above sea level. Right now in the summer when we are pumping, we have a dynamic elevation of about 71 feet below sea level. And then when we let it sit and we let it go static, we're 31 feet below sea level. So we are at the precipice of salting up our basin, and it's one of the last basins. The basin is unique in that it's been adjudicated before the California Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. And had it been included in that, we would basically be underwater rationing and not be able to take any water out of that basin. So the water portfolio projects that have been proposed and been in design for the last 10 years, which includes the desal plant, ASR, recycled water, river water, and the basin, all accounted for, that portfolio of projects accounted for a in lieu pumping of about 700 acre feet per year for 25 years. But that's only, if you do the math, that's only 17,500 feet. So we're about 30,000 still in the hole. So we need to find more. So basically what we at the basin have discovered is that in lieu 700 acre feet is woefully underpinned, or the number's too low. It actually needs to be about double that. The issue is that none of the projects, aside from the desal plant, generate enough excess water to put that in. And if the desal plant goes away, then that 700 acre feet in lieu pumping is just an agreement. It's just a credit card, and this demand, the demand document that the water, or that actually just David Stolt generated, not the district, is basically took the capacity of the recycled water, ASR, and the expansion, and came up with 11,296 acre feet per year, and said,
John,
that's the capacity.
could you tell everyone what ASR is?
It's the Advanced Storage Recovery. Let me give you some credit to where credit is due. There have been and David Stoltz included in this, there are some brilliant kind of this engineering and solutions coming up with this water portfolio solution. ASR is when we have excess rain above the 3,500 acre feet that we're allowed to take, or when I say we, it's us, we're all drinking this water. We're allowed to take off the river. We pump that and put it back into the basin. And it's designed to be about 2,000 acre feet per year in excess. But historically, over the last 10 years, it's only been about 680 feet per acre feet. Now, some infrastructure investment has been made. We should be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of between 1,300 and 1,700 acre feet per year, hopefully. But that's only if we have wet years. But that goes into the overall kind of portfolio. Then there's recycled water, then there's river water, then there's basin water, and then there's desal. But that combined portfolio is how we get to the 10,000 acre feet a year that we've all grown into, plus the 2,300 acre feet of additional demand that Dave Stolt basically just kind of gave an arbitrary haircut, which is why he's going back to the jurisdictions and asking, was that true? And so the jurisdictions are now responding to that. The whole point is that the water master is quite concerned that with the desal plant going away, we aren't going to be able to protect the basin. We're going to salt the basin, and the basin is the critical component. It's the center of all of these. ASR uses it, recycled water uses it, and some of our groundwater uses it. And so that's an issue. That's a very, very serious, compelling issue. And we have directed Bob Jenks to go out and look for water, or go out and find money so that he can buy water. The issue is that we do not have, there are no projects that we can buy the excess water. We may be able to come up with the water, but there are no projects to do that. So that's what the water master is doing. And then kind of related to that, in the Monterey One, just last night, we found out that, the good news, everyone's starting with good news and then kind of hitting us with bad news, but the good news is that we are producing water. The recycled water project is producing water. We've been producing water for about six weeks, since before the holidays. We started producing 2.5 million gallons of pure water every single day, and now we're up to 4.7 million gallons of water. That's the good news. Bad news is we're not doing anything with it. We're basically pumping it back out to the ocean, or we're putting it in ponds, or we're sending it to CSIP. And that's because the water has not been certified by the Department of Drinking Water. Once they show up for the final inspection in mid-February, we'll then be able to start putting it back into the basin, or we'll be able to start putting it in the basin. And then it'll be about somewhere between 6 to 9 months before we can pull that water back out. What we found out last night was that we are not using the industrial wastewaters, which represents about 16% of our source waters, which was quite shocking. I come from power. If all of a sudden in the grid, 16% of your generation just went away, you'd be in a crisis. It's been explained to us that 16% is only when when the water reaches a certain critical point, and then the plant goes into recirc mode, and it basically just goes into a pond. But somewhere that 16% has to be made up, because there's a water purchase agreement for 3,500 acre feet a year, and there's winners and losers in this. It's zero sum. It really is a pie. And so that 16% is going to be coming from Castroville, which has got basically the Salinas Valley all in a tough about that. So my predecessor, Dennis Allion, spent 3 years of his time on Monterey 1 basically working with the Salinas Valley and bringing down what is called the lettuce curtain in just 6 months, because of the water politics, because the desal plant potentially going away, and because because now the source water issues, these are very real issues, the lettuce curtain is coming back, and it's going back up, and basically the 3 years, 3 years has basically been kind of evaporated in the last 6 months. So the good story is that we are producing water. The bad story is that we do not have, or we've yet to kind of figure it out, basically a critical, or a 24/7, 99.99% reliable source water component or input, and that's yet to come. So that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Ms. Getzel.
Good evening. With the holidays, there was no December meetings of a number of the places I normally attend, the Northern Salinas Valley Mosquito Abatement District, the Area Association of Monterey Bay Governments, the United Veterans Council, and the Fort Ord Area Retiree Councils. None of those had official meetings in December. A couple of them had Christmas parties. Councilwoman Lintel attended the AMBAG meeting in January because I was on vacation, and unfortunately she's ill tonight and cannot be here, so I don't know what they talked about, other than she did give me a copy of their audit. Unfortunately, I didn't feel like reading 189 pages of accounting gobbledygook, so to speak. But they are doing well with their accounting. So I guess the bottom line is they didn't find any major errors. So. I did attend the Mosquito Abatement District meeting. They are continuing, they have purchased the property off of Blanco Road and are continuing to work on plans for building a new building, a modern state-of-the-art building. The building they're currently is, the land is leased from the city of Salinas. They do own the buildings on the property themselves. And it's located, if anybody's interested, it's Airport Boulevard in Salinas. But they have design plans, they're doing the final tweakings, and hopefully when our ground lease is up with the city of Salinas in about 2 years, that we will be moving into a new building, or they will be moving into a new building. Of interest, though, they did report that statewide in 2019, they had 214 human West Nile disease cases reported. They also reported, and I'm going to screw up these names, the location where Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopicus, I'll give you the spelling later, Kim. Those are two of the types of mosquitoes that carry some very, very serious diseases such as encephalitis and Zika. They have been found, the Aedes aegyptiitis is found as far north as Placer County, which is north of Sacramento. And the other one as far north as Kern County. Luckily, the good news is that none of the counties where these were found were coastal counties. The bad news is they're all the Central Valley counties. San Diego, Imperial, so all the Southern California counties, and then starting with Kern County goes up the Central Valley. But it just goes to, my point is you need to take care of any standing water that you have. I went out on my balcony the other day and found a whole bunch of water in the bottom bowl under my planters. So you need to empty those out on a regular basis. And if you have a pond or something on, for free, the Northern Salinas Valley Mosquito Abatement District have mosquito fish. They're really teeny tiny fish that you can put in your little ponds and little fountains, bigger fountains in your yards, and they eat the mosquito larvae. So please, for your own health and safety as well as the health and safety of the community, take care of your mosquitoes. Thank you. That's all.
Do we have any issues with the frog pond?
No, they monitor the frog pond themselves. So they come around and do the major public ponds and things like that. They keep an eye on that, and they do some trimmings, and they do some mowings, and they do some sprayings, and they have drones now, and they are fully licensed to apply pesticides using those drones, so they can get into smaller, more confined areas and not spread it over such a large area, as they were doing when they were using contracted helicopters.
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
Yeah, no, I've been down to the frog pond where they've applied like an oil, I think it's a big Bears oil or something that they put on the pond. If you go down there a certain time of year, you'll see that. So that's good. And it is amazing how much standing water you can find in your yard. You know, you just have to go around and look for it, so that's very important. Attended MST in January. We had a kind of a strategic workshop. Just went over, we have a lot of new people there, so we went over a lot of older issues. One thing that we touched on was the Measure Q that's been, that the voters approved 4 years ago. It's a 1/8 cent sales tax. There's a new line 61 that goes to the VA Department of Defense clinic for the veterans. There's senior shuttles that have an extra senior shuttles, and there are MST rides fare discounts. This is all for seniors and people with disability. The Salinas Mobility Service Center was opened up where they teach people how to get onto the buses so that they are not necessarily having to get a rides bus, because the rides bus is an unfunded mandate, and it costs a lot of money. So if we can get people to use the regular bus, it really saves. And there's transit assistance for veterans. So the other thing that they touched on was it's very difficult to get employees recruitment for bus drivers. It seems like they start out with 100 people and they end up with 1 or 2. For this or that reason, they either don't pass a drug test, or there's just a myriad of things that go on, but you ended up with only 1 or 2. So we now have implemented a $500 sign-on. After 1 year, they get $1,000 if they stay as a bus driver, and after 2 to 3 years, they get a $2,000 bonus. And that's really some type of incentive to try and get bus drivers. So if anybody knows people that want to drive a bus, and it starts at about $25 an hour. It's not, it's not anything to sneeze at, but anyway. There's also a big push from the state to have zero emission buses, which is fine, but right now they're not ADA compliant and they're really expensive. So, I don't know where that's going to go. They want to have that done in the next couple of years, but again, you have all the mechanics that go with it, so it's very difficult. So I don't know what the state's going to do to try and help all the agencies to get those zero emission buses. I have been in touch with, I've been the steward for the Little Free Libraries, the little boxes that you guys see on both sides of the city. One's at Quindale Triangle, the other one's at Villa Verde. We've had a real lack of children and teenage books. So I've been in touch with the gal that is in charge of that, and she's been giving me books to put in there. So that's been really good. So I've been replenishing them. And so when you take a book, you know, when you pick up a book, bring one back. So that's it.
One more, just public information from the Retiree Council meeting, that effective 1st of January, veterans, not necessarily retirees, but all veterans who have a service-connected disability, and that disability could be rated as low as 0, as long as they have a veterans health care card, they can use the commissary and PXs at Old Fort Ord. So please take advantage of the services that are out there. And we, the retirees, appreciate this being expanded because the more customers that those facilities have, the better chances that they stay here and continue to support the community. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. After the last meeting, on December 1st, the Mayor's Advisory Committee for Arts and Culture had their very first annual DRO art sale at the Moose. It was a smashing success. We had about 22 Delray Oaks artists, both visual, performing, and I'm seeing an amazing jam maker out in the crowd. And despite the dreary Sunday, we had about 200 attendees. So well done, nicely done, and they're already starting to plan for next year. December 4th, the TMC board meeting, because of the holidays, was divided in between November and December, so we met the beginning of December. There was a nominating committee that was being pulled together for recommendations of new officers that went into effect in January. The Salinas Rail extension is getting pretty exciting, and they are, we are working on property acquisition around where the station will go. So that's moving forward. We also had a public hearing about Ford Tag. I needed to leave early because several of us met at Monterey Bay Community Power Policy Board meeting where 11 jurisdictions, including Delray Oaks, were added to the Joint Powers Agreement. And what you'll be seeing over the next couple of months is because of this kind of influx of people outside of the original Tri-County area, it's going to be a new name. And I think it's Central California something, and they couldn't use power because there was another acronym or something. But there will be a new name, and we won't be getting our energy from them until the 1st of January 2021. And we will be sharing a seat on the policy board with Seaside, Sand City, and Marina, but you'll be hearing a lot more of that as we get closer to receiving that energy. The monthly mayor's meeting was on December 6th, where we met in Monterey. We heard from an organization called Covia. They're a Bay Area organization who is looking to expand in this area. They actually sponsor, I believe, Canterbury Woods and another one of the elderly care facilities. And what they're trying to do with this latest program is to find elderly people with large homes that may have space for a renter, maybe a student, something like that. But so it's a more trusted partnership, while addressing housing, addressing costs for the renters, and also income for the elderly folks that might help them. And also it addresses loneliness. You know, for a lot of our elderly folks, if they're living by themselves and they have a large home, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have a student around that zips in and out with some income? And at the end of it, Mayors Oglesby, Roberson, and I again discussed the possibility, of working together on a stormwater capture project. It's not going to answer all the questions, but we have a creek that runs through our city that feeds Monterey and Seaside bodies of water, and wouldn't it be great if we could capture some of that to help offset, a little bit here and there always helps. Unfortunately, I missed CAG Santa's workshop on Sunday the 8th. I had a family conflict, but heard it was one of the best ever. Is that true?
Wasn't
sorry.
there either.
And then on December 17th, attended the special city council meeting here on the housing element, and the remainder of the month was quiet. And I hope it was for all of you with the holidays and the new year. After the New Year started, we kicked off with a mayor's gathering in Pacific Grove. We do that every month. Couple of new officers, nothing of particular note. Although Congressman Panetta was there and he kind of talked about, they were going into the impeachment season, I suppose, and talked about his position on that and how he was just getting a lot of things done in Washington. On January 9th, Sustainable Delray Oaks was laying out the New Year's plans. Stay tuned for information on the Butterfly Garden opening, maybe in March, and Earth Day activities. January 11th, we moved the What's on Your Mind off a week, so we weren't conflicting with New Year's. Nice group that attended, discussing housing element, development, youth councils, the airport, and safety. On the 18th, I represented the city at the annual Women's March in downtown Monterey. Saw quite a few Delray Oaks neighbors, as well as a plethora of other elected officials. 20th, also attended the Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration at Oldemeyer Center in Seaside. Lots of great music and inspirational speeches. 22nd through the 24th, I went with our city manager to attend the new Mayors and Council Member Academy held in Sacramento by the California League of Cities. It was a great overview. Ms. Getzel and Mr. Gagliotti went last year. Unfortunately, I was deathly ill. It was better for, I think, everybody that I didn't go. But it was a really nice opportunity to meet new and returning mayors and council members from all over the state, swap some stories, and learn more about everything from civic engagement to legal powers and obligations. A great overview for all of us entering into public office. Their next executive level training will be in June here in Monterey. So hopefully we can go as representatives of the area. And I'd lastly like to thank Pat for attending the January TAMC meeting. It sounds like we were all busy, and unfortunately she's not here to tell us about that. Upcoming, I just have a couple of things. Ballots are coming soon. Please make sure your neighbors and any new 18-year-olds are registered to vote and understand how to vote and how to investigate what to vote for. February 1st, we'll be having What's on Your Mind, 10 a.m., Old Town Hall. I hope you can join us. And I also wanted to announce two new mayor's advisory committees. One is emergency preparedness. Mary Solsang, actually in the back, has offered to chair it. We're hoping to review local resources, bring providers together, outline educational opportunities to help keep our residents and neighbors safe in the case of a disaster or emergency. If you'd like to participate, please let me know. And the second one is on the airport, to create a historical record of our relationship with the airport and the pros and cons and how they've grown and we've grown, and sometimes together and sometimes not. And then that's it for me, for my report. And we'll move on to the consent agenda. I want to remind everyone, the council and or anyone in the public, if you'd like to discuss any item that is listed in the consent agenda, that now is the time. You can simply say you'd like to pull an item. Generally, they're administrative, minutes, unpaid bills, and things like that. But if you ever see something that you'd like to discuss, now would be the time. Any? No? Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that item C1, the strategic planning grid in the packet is out of date. And a revised strategic planning grid was provided on the table outside and to council this evening. We'll update the packet online. I apologize for that oversight.
Thank you.
Wait, you meant the one that was attached to the packet was out of date? That was not the one?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, got it. Okay, yeah.
I don't want to pull one of these items, but I wonder, are these particular items available on the website, the minutes and so on?
Yep.
They are? Okay, thanks.
It's in the packet.
Yeah. Any other comments? All right. All in favor?
Move to approve?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to new business, and I'll turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you is a information-only item, no decision tonight. It's an update on the status of regional habitat conservation planning for the former Fort Ord properties. It'll include a brief discussion about Joint Powers Authority formation, the existing Fora Habitat Management Plan, and a little bit about funding. We're really fortunate tonight to have Aaron Harwain and Kendall Flint and Steve Flint here with us, who've been intimately involved in this process. I think in the case of Aaron, well, probably DDA's involvement predates your birth, but RGS's involvement has certainly been a year or more.
Explain your acronyms.
Sure.
Please.
Which one? Oh, Denise Duffy and Associates, the firm that Aaron works for. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron, who will turn it over to Kendall, and I will only preface it by saying that this matter is of profound importance to our city. It's important for several reasons. First and foremost, it is the mechanism, however this ends up going, by which we will manage the habitat on the former Fort Ord property, in particular, the endangered species. Number two, it's important because it will impact how we develop the Fort Ord property. It'll impact costs, timing, and so that's of profound importance as well. Councilmember Gangliotti in his role as the Fora board rep and myself in my role as the admin committee chair for Fora are meeting weekly with a habitat working group that's a subset of the Fora board and the admin committee with Kendall and Aaron and others to make progress on this important matter, and so tonight's an important update. Over to you.
Well, thank you. How's it sound? Good? Okay.
Can everyone hear her?
Everyone can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I always love coming to City Council and Planning Commission and talking about Fort Ord. I have been working on it for a long time. This is my 20th year with Denise Duffy and Associates. Wow. And I've been working on this contract with Fora and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the HCP and the CEQA-NEPA document since 2005. So a good long while. And so I have a lot of knowledge to share. I will talk as slow as I can and be careful with my acronyms. And I will try to keep it very simple. And you can always ask questions at the end. All right? So I wanted to give everyone a little bit of history about how we got to where we are with this Habitat Conservation Plan, the HCP, for the former Fort Ord. When the Army closed the military base, it was a major federal action, so it required Endangered Species Act consultation between the Army and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. As part of that consultation process, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service required the Army to prepare a habitat management plan to mitigate for its impacts related to the closure, which included remediation activities, the cleanup that they're doing, have been doing for a number of years, and also the disposal and reuse of all the parcels on this 28,000 plus acre property. So to mitigate for those impacts to listed species, the Army had to prepare this habitat management plan. And what it did is establish a preserve system, which included approximately 18,540 acres of habitat management lands and about 10,000 acres of redevelopment lands. And it authorized the Army to clean up and mitigate for those impacts to listed species. So once the Army was done with these parcels, some were directly transferred to the other federal agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, where the National Monument is. Others went straight to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, FORA, as many of you are familiar with. And then FORA would transfer those lands onto the local jurisdictions, including the city of Delray Oaks. And as each of those land transfers happen, there's language in all of the deeds that said, you shall comply with the habitat management plan. And each parcel, each land transfer has different management requirements, and that's important to understand that it's not a one-size-fit-all situation. So that was the federal to federal agreement. So once the land got to a non-federal entity, such as the city of Delray Oaks, in order to redevelop their properties, the local non-federal entities would require a different type of permit to mitigate for take of listed species. And that included the preparation of a habitat conservation plan, which supported that permit application. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. So the HCP allows for a number of covered activities within, this is the entire base, 28,000 plus acres. The green denotes the habitat management lands, again, which are 18,000 plus acres. And the pink, this is my watermelon map. The pink denotes the development areas. So within both the green and the pink, the HCP and the permits issued to the local land use jurisdictions would allow a number of covered activities that included redevelopment activities in the pink, but also FORTAG, for example, which the mayor mentioned, in the green areas and the pink areas. It allows for trail and fuel break maintenance in the green areas as well. A lot of good stuff being covered. So there are 8 covered species in this HCP, 8 listed, state and federally listed and/or federally listed species. And of concern for the city is this little sand gilia, Monterey gilia, which is a state listed species. Then we have California tiger salamander, and if I get into acronym mode, you'll hear me say CTS. And seaside bird's-beak, which is a state listed plant as well. The salamander, CTS, is both federal and state listed. State and federally listed. These 3 species are known to occur within Delray Oaks city properties and would require take permits and would be covered under this HCP, currently underway. The adoption and implementation of the HCP, however, requires a little bit more environmental review. So under the state and federal environmental regulations, CEQA and NEPA, DD&A, Denise Duffy and Associates, is contracted to prepare the environmental impact report and environmental impact statement. They're joint federal and state documents. This was my 7th draft, I think, of this document since 2005, and we finally went out for public review before the holidays last year, November 1st through December 16th. It was a happy holiday season for me to have that out the door. And so far, and if you have any questions about how to submit any comments or get access to the documents, I'm happy to provide you that information. So far, we have about 30 plus comment letters, and the next step in this environmental review process would be to provide written responses to all those comments and finalize the documents, any final changes. So here's the good stuff. So what does this HCP do for the city of Delray Oaks? So let's see, pointer. So this is Delray Oaks federal property here in the red, right? For our former Fort Ord property. This is the proposed conceptual south boundary realignment project. Here in the green is the entitled RV park. And about here is where Delray Oaks had about 100 acres cleaned to a residential level for future land use. We have the Frog Pond over here. Of note, this map shows you potential CTS, California Tiger Salamander, habitat. So these are a couple ponds. So this is the, well, future national monument lands. However, this is the high impact area. You guys are probably pretty familiar. It's not open to the public. It's closed. It's extremely dangerous. Don't go out there. I, however, been out there to those ponds, wandering around, catching salamanders. So we know that they're here, and they are known to travel 2.2 kilometers, which is this blue line here. So any upland habitat. So what they like to do is, let's say a salamander, they like to live in these small mammal burrows. They will live there during the dry season, and once it starts raining, they will wander over to a pond, do their thing, lay their eggs, and wander back up. And they are known to wander farther. And they might be in any of this area over here. So what the HCP would do would allow the city to have the permits to undertake some of these projects, including FORTAG. I don't have FORTAG on here, but FORTAG wants to come down through here as well. So that's an example. Another example is the Seaside Birds Beak, which is known to occur on this corner of South Boundary and General Gym. If South Boundary gets realigned, the city would need a permit to do that work if those populations could not be avoided. So those are some examples of the benefits that the HCP brings to the city. We've been working on this since 2005. However, this has been a longer process for and the group. The permittees have been working on this for 22, 23 years. So this schedule is obviously subject to change. And I think one of the things to note here is this is what we'd like to see happen. Everyone is pretty aware that FORA is going to sunset. So there are a couple key things that we want to do right now. There have been discussions, and Kendall will get into them, about some potential changes to the HCP. But in the big picture, these environmental documents cover a number of different scenarios and alternatives that would allow future tiering. So there is value with getting this EIR certified by the FORA board before it sunsets for future use, whether it's under an HCP or individual permits that the city might need to work on. And I will hand it over to Kendall.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, I'm Kendall Flint. I'm with Regional Government Services, that's the RGS. And as Aaron said, basically the staff from DDA and our other consultants have been working on this document for quite some time. But as are all things related to FORA, nothing is as simple as it might seem. So one of the things that has been looked at, there was a concern that the Habitat Conservation Plan might be more ambitious than the cities and the county and the land use agencies would need in order to facilitate the growth that they may or may not be planning. So one of the things that was set up is what we're calling the Habitat Working Group. And this is made up of members from the board, and Councilman Gagliani is on that particular committee, as well as members from the admin committee. And what they're doing is they're meeting weekly to determine two things that I think are most important to every agency we've discussed, which is really, how much is this going to cost? Because at the end of the day, there is an obligation for all jurisdictions, if nothing happens, to continue with the habitat management plan, right? But there's a secondary option, as Aaron mentioned, do we look at a habitat conservation plan? So what's happening right now is that the consultant teams are reviewing the actual plan development with each jurisdiction, including Delray Oaks. and setting up a possible alternative view of this, which involves phasing, which means the current habitat conservation plan imagines full build-out of the former Fort Ord. And that build-out is anticipated to complete within a 50-year time frame. But when we actually look at it, many of the jurisdictions said, you know, we're not going to build anything for 15 or 20 years in some cases. So those ideas were all revised to look at a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, 15, 25, and 50. Now, why that's important? Because when you have the Habitat Conservation Plan, in order to implement that, which is also in the document that was produced, you have to have an endowment that allows that to be funded into the future. So when the initial studies were looked at, that endowment was pegged at close to $65 million. Now, currently, FORA had set aside, based on previous funding that it had, approximately $16, $17 million. So you can see that there's a sizable gap there. And those kind of gaps are of a great concern to potential member agencies within the HCP. So what's really important right now is what we're doing is going through the Habitat Working Group and assessing the costs for both HCP and HMP for each of the jurisdictions so they can really look at them. Now, on the benefit side, the HCP allows a single agent, a single take permit that all of the agencies can get into. But as an example, there were a number of projects that were considered as part of the HCP that may not be built and may be removed from that. And if that's the case, then that makes the cost of implementation substantially lower. And by phasing, you also give yourself an opportunity, if that's the way people want to go, to set up replacement fees for the community facility district funds, which is currently the way FORA was getting their money, right? So when you have these fees, they are traditionally paid for by developers. So if you do it right and you plan accordingly, it shouldn't be something that affects local agencies' general fund. It should be something that is paid for by future development within the community. Now, after meeting with the folks from the regulatory agencies, we know factually, they've been on this train for 20 years with Erin and many of her colleagues. They have believed that the FORA consortium has been moving in this direction, but it's becoming abundantly clear that that conversation is not going to be over in enough time for FORA's sunset. And so the alternative plan that we're looking at, and this is a possibility that has not come up yet, but one of the things that this Habitat Working Group may look at is forming an interim joint powers authority to continue the conversation. So not to implement the HCP, but to continue to look at all these different options that may be before them. And among those options might be to revise the HCP to make it more in line with what the jurisdictions actually plan to build or develop in the time frame that it might actually be developed. And one of the alternatives on that basically are, okay, when Erin mentioned the EIR, the environmental impact report is something that FORA is the lead agency on. So FORA is in charge of that. The federal version, the EIS, that is the Department of Fish and Game. So they will go on their merry way, whether FORA sunsets or not, they'll continue. The EIR has a no-build option, which is essentially the habitat management plan. So if the board chooses to certify the EIR, that document still could have some value to it. But it will be a discussion as to whether or not they want to wait and redo it or look at it again with the updated habitat conservation plan. These are all in flux, but we anticipate that that discussion will wrap up about the middle of March, and at which point that working group will make a recommendation to the FORA board, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. So on this Joint Powers Authority, a couple things that are being explored. One, continue the discussion post-FORA, but I want to make this super, super clear. FORA has no actionable item on that. They do not have a seat at that JPA. There's no FORA staff that will be participating in that JPA. It is not FORA 2.0. It is simply a mechanism whereby these agencies can continue discussion on their own. They would have to determine how they want to move forward. It could be staffed through some of the individual agencies. It could be contracted. There's a million ways to do it, very similar to some of the JPAs that you're already participating in. So this is not a huge financial piece. One of the things that we would likely be looking at is a board action that would allocate funding, seed money, if you will, to make sure that there was funds available if they chose to move forward with this and open up some of these documents. And at that point, through that discussion, there would be a discussion about whether or not it's best to go with a regional or individual approach to managing habitat. So either way, there's going to be management of habitat. The question is whether or not you're going to plan for that mitigation collectively as a region with a single take permit, or if each agency will go on their own. Important to note, if each agency goes on its own, it is likely more expensive for the agency, and you would have to completely start over with the negotiations for habitat restoration and mitigation with Fish and Wildlife, because they were basing it on the group effort, and if that changes, that will change the overall approach. Now, these working group meetings are open to the public. However, it is not a public meeting. It's not like a workshop, right? So you're absolutely invited to come and listen. There is opportunity for public comment. These are held from 10 a.m. to noon through March at where the FORA board meets at the FORA offices over in Marina. So in February 13th, some other things that I think will be of interest to the group. There are a number of parcels that the Army had and was transferring over to the local agencies, and most of these have to also participate in what's called the Environmental Services Collective Agreement. And what that is basically the removal of things that go boom on the former Fort Ord. And so we don't like things that go boom, and so when FORA goes away, who takes on that role? And at this point, the board is considering nominating the city of Seaside. Seaside would become what's called the ESCA successor, but it also means that they would now take over as the Economic Development Conveyance Agency, and they would be in charge of transferring that property over to those different agencies if they have property. And if they do, they also have to basically make sure that each of the city, county, whatever it is, that they get those, and they are transferred in an expedient manner. They do not have any land use oversight over any jurisdiction. So previously, many of you had projects you'd have to go before FORA for consistency with the base reuse plan. When FORA goes to sleep on June 30th, the base reuse plan is not necessarily alive. In other words, if you chose to do something that was different, you could absolutely do that. You would just have to open up your environmental documents again and start over. But there is no more oversight for the use of land for its consistency with the base reuse plan. The other thing that would transfer over to Seaside revolves around water. And if the Army, this is a big if the Army finds additional water later at any time, the water rights and the wastewater reclamation rights would flow to Seaside, who would in turn go to Marina Coast Water District for a fair and equitable distribution by ratio. And these are the same ratios that everyone has already agreed to by agency. To be fair, there's definitely been some spirited discussions with some of the member agencies about what that looks like. So we're hoping that would help them develop language that people can live with and agree and have trust. Trust is something that, at least in our experience with this particular band, is a challenge. And so we have to be really conscious about that. So as we go through these other things, there'll be 5 more meetings, with the final board meeting being on June 3rd. Now, as of June 30th, the other things you may have heard of, the Transportation Agency of Monterey County will begin regional fee collections for regional roadway projects. So that will no longer be coming in. The Community Facilities District fees that were collected by FORA go away entirely, so there's no more collection mechanism for that whatsoever. The County of Monterey would assume any overflowing administrative functions, and these are really like who takes over the actual documents, personnel records, this sort of thing. Any funds that are in FORA's bank account on June 30th that have not been spent by the board will be given to the County of Monterey, and then Monterey will be responsible for distributing those equitably between all of the various member agencies. I can tell you that the board will have actions in March, April, and May to spend such funds, with the idea being that the only thing left in the kitty is basically those fees that were already promised for other projects, including South Boundary Road or other things that were there. These would be administrative pieces. I think the big thing to take away, we've also got a secondary effort that is basically for building removal. There's a discussion about floating a bond. Staff has been meeting with folks up at the Capitol and talking about whether or not that's going to be feasible or not. We expect to have notification back from the state probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks to determine if that's going to happen. If it does happen, then that will basically tie the property tax revenues that were generated on the base to repayment of that bond. And once that is done, that would then come back to the cities and the agencies. That bond would generate enough funds to remove a substantial number of buildings, increasing the overall property values. And it's viewed by all of the member agencies actually as a really good thing if they can pull it off, because it means more jobs, better development. And I think, as most folks would agree, if you have barracks and things like this that have already impacted the environment and have already been built upon, cleaning those out and building something better, nicer, stronger is a really good use of that real estate. And having those things cleaned off seems to make sense. So these are all the different things that are happening at this point. Forest staff continues to downsize. We have a new executive officer, Josh Metz, and most of the staff is transitioned out to other places. But in general, I think that Habitat Working Group really has most of the heavy lifting, I think, in the coming weeks, and certainly working very closely with the administrative committee as well as the others. But that is the overall presentation for us tonight. I'm available to answer any questions you might have. Just as a reminder, we will likely be able to come back to you probably in a couple of weeks through the city manager's office with additional information about how your fiscal picture looks with these different scenarios, what is going to be in the best interests of the city. I will say that if the choice is made, and we don't know, if the choice is made to move forward with the HCP, it would require, most likely, all of the agencies that are affected to participate. So if we have one or two agencies that pull out, frankly, the financial model does not work out. That being said, it does not preclude the city of Delray Oaks or any other municipality in forming other relationships with its neighbors in a different way. You'd still have to jump through the hoops at the federal level, and you'd still have to jump through the hoops for getting your take permit, but there are other options out there. I think certainly with your trails and some of the projects that this community has planned, there are some real advantages if the HCP goes through, but I don't want to paint a rosy picture that it's absolutely going to go through. We don't know. We're still waiting to see what the will of the board and the communities are going to be. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you.
I had one.
Yep, John?
Yeah, on the county assumption of the financials, or actually the monies, the revenue, or that's about $16 million basically sitting in a FORA account.
Not that money.
Okay, yeah, because the slide before this, you talked about that JPA. That's one of the key functions of that JPA,
Yes.
is to receive those monies.
So here's this, there's a couple scenarios that happen. So let's say we form scenario number 1, which basically says, okay, there's going to be an interim JPA.
Right.
And this is why it's important, because a couple of folks said, hey, give us the 17 million, we'll handle it.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Right.
So what is more likely to happen is that the FORA board would take an action that says, let's say that with Denise Duffy and Associates and others, that they figure, I'm just throwing out a number, I'm not saying what this is the number is, but let's say that it's $1 million to redo the HCP and perhaps do some other things, right? The FORA board could award the JPA that money, right? And then the JPA could serve as the lead agency to monitor that process going through. The remaining funds would more than likely be put in an escrow account.
Yeah.
And then the two options, and this is per the state statute, if that group determines, you know what, we've got enough here to at least fund the phase 1 with our existing endowment, and we think we can make that work, well, then they can form that JPA for that purpose and the funds can transfer over. If they do not, then those funds do go to the county, and then they are distributed again equally between all of the member agencies that were participating. So either one of those scenarios could happen, but they would not, the interim JPA would not get those funds free and clear. The only way the JPA gets the money is if they are agreeing to implement the HCP for the full funding.
So that's a little different understanding when I left Friday, is that I thought the interim was going to receive all those money. That was one of the key drivers to having the interim, was that we've got to have something to basically put that money into. Otherwise, it goes to the county and no one wants that.
Yeah, nobody wants, and I think that was, we discussed this with council afterwards as well, because I think there were a lot of, this continues to be evolving discussion, but they wouldn't be able to just give the funds over without any type of ties to it, right? Because the FORA board, if the FORA board gives the money to the JPA, the JPA would have to have an agreement to use those funds for their intended purpose, which was the HCP.
That's where the food fight is right there.
Exactly. But in the interim, the board could decide to allocate funds to continue this discussion, right?
Yeah.
And those funds would be enough to, keep us going. And that that other money would then still, we would suggest, if it's not an escrow account, it could even be put into an endowment account where it starts earning better interest than it would if it was just
That would
sitting.
probably work. I think that would work.
And then
That
you'd
keeps
see.
it out of the county's hands. but it
It's, yeah,
doesn't-
but it definitely does not hit the county's hands until such time as all the member agencies said, we are not
That
going
actually-
forward with an
that's- That's a pretty
HCP.
reasonable
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
Mr. Pick.
Thank you. Just great presentation, both of you. Just I want to highlight a couple things. So, first of all, HCP's habitat conservation plans
Yep.
exist in the state of California.
Yes, there's actually more than 40 of them, and they're all different types and sizes. Most of them involve multiple jurisdictions. We actually looked at 8 different ones when we were giving briefings to FORA. Most are, by kind of an interesting piece, a $65 million endowment sounds huge. It's actually quite small compared to others that are out there. It's also not unusual to have a county and multiple agencies that are participating in this way. The HCPs have been used successfully to implement programs actually throughout the state. There are 4 or 5, Yolo County, East Contra Costa. We've actually put information on that in the admin packages. But it's a very common way of doing it. The other thing that I think is important to mention, because I know we've had some questions from county staff, when we talk about an endowment, something that's earning interest, it's not like you and I go to Bank of America and open a CD. This is different. It's set in an account where someone tells you what they believe that return on investment is going to be. UC Santa Cruz currently has one, and their return on investment is 4.2%. They ranged all over the place, but as far as the HCP goes, that was the assumption that was made in that document. But yeah, those funds are, it's quite common.
And I just want to emphasize the point you made earlier, that city's general fund, or at least our objective here and the practice as I understand it, city's general funds are not the source for financing an HCP.
No.
But rather the development fees paid, or a CFD paid for by developers
Correct.
are what fund the endowment.
It is absolutely correct. In fact, that was something the regulatory agencies brought up as well. One caveat to that, if there is a plan in place for what your habitat conservation implementation plan is going to be, like what it's going to be, and that's why we have to look at when these developments are going to happen and when we anticipate those revenues coming in. It is not uncommon for a jurisdiction to loan itself in an interim transfer to cover a cost and then get that reimbursed back to the general fund. But the overwhelming number of folks out there have not had to do that. The majority of them are able to fund through development. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why it's so critical that that HCP reflects reality. That's what's really going to happen. And even when we were looking at the initial projections, initially they were looking at 1,500 units a year. We're nowhere near that. It's more like 300. And that's been consistent. So you have to adjust all those. But again, because this document was started so long ago and with so many other iterations, it's just one of those things where it kind of, So, I mean, that's why now I think folks are really saying, hey, let's take a look at this again. Let's get it right. And frankly, that's one of the things that Landwatch and others brought up as well and saying, hey, what are we doing? And I think, our recommendation is, to continue that discussion and find a fit that works for all the agencies, that accurately reflects that future development, and then has real numbers that people can understand and are doable for the implementation.
Great.
Can
I
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
let others
Yeah.
first? Nope.
I wanted one clarifying point. The HCP is funded by development, but the HMP baseline, if we do nothing out on that property, then it becomes our responsibility.
That is correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's something,
Yeah,
now, if we do bring in a developer, that can then also be folded into those impact fees.
Yes, and that's, you have to be very careful about the fees, right? Because you can't charge an impact fee for development that hasn't actually impacted that
No, that's
piece,
right,
right?
right,
So you
right.
have to look at in lieu fees. There are a number of
Yeah.
different ways of
Yeah.
structuring it. And I think the other thing that's really important with the habitat management plans is that, look, you're going to have to do that no matter
Regardless.
what,
It is-
right?
right,
And so what a lot of other agencies, cities have done is basically said, okay, let's take a look at fees for that. I know that I've spoken to the city manager about that. Your local roadways, you treat it like parks, like anything else. Now this is an ongoing cost that you're going to have to bear.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you're planning for that and you've structured the right mechanism that's legally defensible. You cannot, and this is, these fees things get very complicated because people are like, well, why didn't we just do another CFD? And a community facilities district has to be voted on by all of the property owners, right? And so it's easy to do when there's nobody on the property and there's only one or two owners, then you can get that. But if you tried to do that at a community Now, it's really hard and highly unlikely
We
to.
could.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
we're in a
Yeah.
unique situation to
Yeah.
actually do that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I just want to make that point
Yeah.
crystal clear, that that land does not come free, meaning
No.
that land comes with a cost.
And it's
a
tied to the
recurring
deed.
cost.
The deed is
Exactly,
in
it
there.
goes with the land,
and
I
enforced by the U.S. Army and/or other agencies, so you can't just not do it.
Exactly. Well, but for the last 26 years, they have been basically letting
Yeah.
it slide because they always assumed that this HCP would go into
Well,
place.
and we brought that up to the land use, the regulatory agencies, and they basically said, look, we've been
Yes.
working with you for 20 years, right? Under the assumption that you guys are going to get this done.
Right.
So if that does not happen,
Right.
that conversation
reckoning.
and that is going to change. And you
Right.
need to know that and plan for it.
So I have a couple of a little lower to the ground questions. Do we have pieces that need to be transferred?
City of Seaside, I don't believe you have.
We're in Delray Oaks.
I'm sorry, pardon me.
That's okay.
I'm on my own. I do not believe you do, actually. I'm going to defer to.
I think there may be one or two parcels associated with South Boundary Road.
Yes, you're correct.
Right there
Yeah.
that have not been transferred, but all other property has been.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is the estimated cost per year for a HCP?
And that is what we are working on right now.
Right.
Because when they initially, if you look in the Habitat Conservation Plan, you'll notice a variety of programs that were in there. The airport, actually the the connector road is in there. There's a bunch of things in there. And there's a bunch of housing assumptions that are no longer the same. So if you remove those out or you scale that back, it changes the amount of funds that would be required to implement. And that is what our friends at EPS, Economic Planning Systems, are doing now. So they've met with each one of the agencies, including Delray Oaks, and said, okay, what's your program here for 15, 25, and 50? What is everybody else's? What does that mean in terms of development fees per unit? How much would that be? When would that funds be realized? And then you compare that to the cost analysis of per acre mitigation, by species. Some are more expensive than others, that sort of thing. And we're doing the same thing with the habitat management plan as that baseline, so that everybody knows, look, this is what it's going to cost pretty much if you don't do anything, if you just stick with that. So we should have those. We're going to be presenting that to the Habitat Working Group a week from Friday.
Okay. And can you also show me that map? I'd really like to see where, I think there was one kind of circle of, it was the salamander. What about the Sangilia? That was the one up on Gen Gym?
Yeah, I'm going to let Erin, the plant and bunny lady.
So just to clarify, I only showed you Seaside Bird's Beak and California Tiger Salamander. We have not to date found any Sangilia on the various properties, but I haven't been down here recently. So, and that's probably better habitat for it. And I didn't want to say for sure, but we have surveyed this a lot since 2007 or something. So the bird's beak on the corner of the road, we've been monitoring this population over the years, and also the salamander habitat.
So, and our 100 acres is where on this map?
So it's about right here.
Right in the middle of the circle, where okay.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. So as we started to come up with these assumptions, these planning assumptions, it became apparent to staff, at least initially, that for us, we are looking at development in the first phase of this phased HCP. It's a 50-year total term. Let's call it, what is it, 225 years?
15, 25.
15, 25, and
15,
50.
25, and 50.
Yeah.
In the first 15 years, in the first phase, we're assuming development of that hashed green area, which is the RV resort. We know the number of acres that are in there, and we know it's all California Tiger Salamander impacted. We're assuming development of the 100 acres adjacent to that with residential. And we know the acreage of that in rough order of magnitude. And all of that is California Tiger Salamander impacted. All of that happening in phase one, all of it needing mitigation, all of it needing take permits. And so for some cities, the assumption is we're not going to impact, we're either not going to develop in the near term, or we're not going to develop in areas that impact endangered species in the near term. That is not the case for us. I mean, to make that planning assumption for this city, I think is irresponsible. So our planning assumption is that we are going to require take permits for California tiger salamander and potentially for other the other species, which is going to make our initial costs higher and our need for the HCP or an HMP greater.
And I did want to just add on that. The reason for the phasing is that in terms of the endowment, right, you can fund an endowment just for phase one and not implement phase 2, 3, or so on until an endowment or a source of funding can be found. So that's why the phasing is very attractive and has been utilized in other jurisdictions, because it does allow you to take a smaller bite with what you can handle and then move forward. There's what they call a stay-ahead provision, which means you always have to be mitigating just a little bit more than what you're developing. So that will be part of the discussion on that phase one. What does that look like? Instead of 65 million, are we down to 25 million? And is that more realistic and more palatable for our member agencies? Does it make more sense to them financially? Those are the kinds of discussions we'll be having.
But again, it comes back to everyone participating, correct?
We've looked at different scenarios about what would happen. So as an example, Monterey Peninsula Parks, right?
Yeah.
They're like, yay, but their board, they just have no bandwidth for a JPA. If they pull out, that is not a deal breaker for everybody else. If Monterey Del Rio stay in, great. If Seaside moves out, that can be a challenge. If the county moves out, that could be a challenge. But that's one of the things we're looking at. What the issue here is really the access to those developer fees, right? Because if they go out, that means the impact fees or development fees in the other communities would have to go up in order to do that, in order to make that difference. But then the other flip side of that, and that's why you really have to look at it hard, if you don't have a mechanism in place to help your city evolve at the pace and economically the way you want, if that's not there, your city goes flat. And that's true of all communities. You have to have some way in order to get where you want to go. The question is, what's the best path for the city of Delray Oaks? And even if Seaside steps out, there may be other alternatives to look at with other relationships. It just may be more expensive and it may take longer. But I think from what we've understood from Dino and from others, it's like, there are some really cool projects. I looked at that Fortag project, the trails. I mean, that's a great regional benefit for many people. That kind of a project becomes much more complicated because you have to still get take permits.
Okay. So just through conversations with other electeds, I understand Seaside may not develop out there?
Well, here's
within their Fort Ord parcel and has offered some land for mitigation?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to put that. Okay, so even if you give somebody land, you still have to pay, it's a gift, you would have to pay for that mitigation and you have to keep that land up.
Yes.
The other question is whether or not there either is or is not particular species on Seaside. And I would also say that, and we just met with them today, depending on who you're speaking to at that particular agency, there may be different viewpoints on the speed of development and what is and what is not. But I will say that they did meet with Aaron and they did put out their projections. Those will all be part of public record, so you'll all be able to look at it and say, this is what they think. But I mean, I'm not going to name names, but one person's like, I'm going to triple our development, and the other one's saying, I'm not going to develop anything, and that's from the same jurisdiction. So, you know, at some point, there's going to have to be a decision made.
Okay. Did you have a question?
Yeah, in terms of environmental benefit, it's much better to have the larger HCP rather than the small piecemealing postage stamps. I mean, the agencies 2 weeks ago made that point very, very clear that they would much rather see, and our mitigation ratios would reflect that, meaning that we would have a much lower mitigation ratio for whatever impact would be if we had a larger, more contiguous.
If you start over, make no mistake, your mitigation ratios will change. Your costs will change. Your process starts basically from day one. You're going to do everything all over. And that is a very protracted and long process.
Not only that, but it also, I mean, just in terms of environmental benefit, it is not as good as a larger contiguous swath of
No,
fine.
and from strictly from an economic standpoint, I mean, truly that, again, this goes to what the cities really want to develop. I don't want to
Right.
make it seem like it's, bulldozing everything, but if there's going to be economic development in this area, more housing, more jobs, it's going to have to come from someplace.
Right.
And if you don't have the ability to build, that's going to have an impact.
Right.
So I'd like to open it up to the public. Could you, or you have, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Please sit. Yes?
Aaron.
Jim, can you come up to the, please? No.
So educate me here a little bit, Aaron, because I'm sitting back there.
Can you let us know who you are?
Jim Clark, Villa Verde, Delray Oaks. And I've lived here 40 years, so before they closed. Are the plants you talked about and the California tiger salamander, are they new residents out on Fort Ord? So they've been there so that's I'm trying to get my head around why Fort Ord was open for 40 or 50 years with 40,000 soldiers that tromped through that area with tanks and Humvees and tractors and bombs and grenades. And somehow all this survived that. And we're worried about developing, that we got to protect them over developing a few acres. It just, I don't know. If they survived all that. Anyway.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. Alexis Bunton, Portola Drive. I just want to point out that they are endangered species, probably because of the tramping and the blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I just want to clarify what I understand and ask a couple quick yes/no questions, because I may not, this is very confusing. Thank you for the excellent presentation, and you are clearly very experienced and knowledgeable. So from what I understand, it wasn't directly defined. So take means putting a dollar amount on commoditizing the killing of endangered species, basically. If I'm wrong, correct me. And then also, correct me, the purpose of this consultancy is to get our development plan done before forest sunsets and all these unknowns about negotiations are put in place.
That's wrong.
I'm not understanding. Okay.
So here's the thing, is that, let's just say that there were certain assumptions made. Can everyone hear her in the back? Can you hear her? Okay. There were certain assumptions that were made, right? So
Yeah.
what FORA and actually the member agencies, and I'm saying really this is the member agencies, more
Yeah.
than less FORA, they're meeting right now to determine what the realistic growth pattern would be. That would go past FORA. And that, what we're saying, I think that they understand, is that this is not a group of folks that have a speedy way of reaching these conclusions.
Yeah,
So-
as we've seen.
Yeah, so the idea is
Yeah.
rather than have this artificial, and I always say artificial, rather than just, cut it, give them an opportunity, if they want it, to continue that discussion. If they don't want it, they don't have to take it. But what we're hearing from the agencies is like, yeah, we want to know where are all these species? Are they really impacted? Are they not impacted? How much is it going to cost me to save them? I'm going to mitigate and get more acres to set them aside. And what is frankly not developing at all? Counties come up with this a couple of times. They've got some acreage that is prime habitat. They're saying, well, if we just develop on the habitat and move over here to areas that have been blighted through other uses, what does that do? So that's why we want to continue the conversation. It doesn't mean continuing FORA. It just means giving all the member agencies an opportunity to say, all right, we want to take a look at this again and perhaps.
Oh, okay. Edit the HCA. It's to spend the HCP. It's to take the extra time to edit it because we're not happy with the way that it's been done with the federal law in place. Okay.
I wouldn't say if they're not happy with the ways it's done. It's just
Yeah.
things have changed.
Ah, okay.
So
I gotcha.
As time has marched on,
Yeah.
things have changed.
Totally makes sense. Thank you. That's really clear. So I have one more question for RGS, and then just quick yes/no questions for you. Can you, and I haven't seen everything that's in the potential contract, or the contract at all. I've just seen this presentation. But for that amount of money, can you guarantee that we'll get all those things done?
I think that's
in-
a separate item.
by
I
the-
would defer to council on that one, but I think that is.
Yeah, I think, Alexis, are you talking about the RGS contract that'll be considered tonight?
Yeah.
That's the next agenda item.
Oh, so I should save my question
Yep.
for then? Okay, I will. So for the council, I'm wondering, given the endangered species from plants to animals that can be killed or trampled, I was wondering if our RV park has planned to ban dogs. Because that seems to make sense to me, given what dogs do to the environment.
I'm going to say, I don't know. Any other public comment? Questions?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Doug Burton. I live on Paloma Road. I have a statement for our council and a question for our experts. First of all, what was the radius of the blue circle?
2.2 kilometers.
Okay, 2.2 kilometers. And who drew that on the map?
Our GIS gurus.
And where's this?
Thank you.
I know that one.
Thank
But
you.
yes. And where's the center point?
The middle of the blue breeding ponds.
Okay. So there are other ponds that weren't on the screen?
Yes.
That makes the center point?
There.
It's in the middle of several ponds?
How do I answer? Those are the two closest ponds, so any other ponds would just be within that, but farther away.
Okay.
Oh gosh, how do I say that?
Okay, so the center point is important, and that we know where it's at. Who came up with the number 2.2 kilometers?
Actually, the state increased it from the federal standard of 2 kilometers. The state raised it to 2.2. And that's based on a number of published scientific papers.
Okay. Thank you very much for those answers. I have a caution for our city council, and that is when we have charts like this with depictions of areas that have certain, I guess, attributes that we need to be careful about, like endangered species, we really need to be digging into the details of those. I'm sure that we are in many cases, but that is, there are probably 20 assumptions behind the things on those charts, if not 50 or 100 if I know the government. So please be careful with those assumptions and don't just accept that a blue line on a chart means that's really where the blue line's at, or that there are in fact some species in that area. Thank you. And I heard that alluded to a little bit. Thank you.
So could you answer, when do we get official notification of our blue lines? How do we get?
Can we show it again? Is that okay? So there might, just to clarify what I was trying to say, there might be ponds over here, but the blue line might fall here, here, here. So this is the maximum distance from a node breeding site. Again, that's 2.2 kilometers to there. Official notification, Mayor, maybe the question is, when do we get confirmation that the regulatory agencies agree with our assessment of upland habitat?
Sure.
That would be through permit issuance and agreement. Right now, in the HCP, the agencies have agreed with this assessment. When you open up the permit application process again, they may or may not agree with us on this. They might decide they walk 2.3 kilometers. Who knows what they'll say.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, did that answer yours? Okay.
Not all of them. I want to make sure we pay attention to the details. It's very important. Very
I agree. Any other public comment?
Gary Krieger again. Quindell, a couple different questions, observations, stuff for you to think about. Just to back up what Alexis is saying, yeah, a lot of species didn't survive the 40,000 troops stomping around. I was at Miramar. My favorite was the vernal fairy shrimp, but we learned to deal with it. And, you know, we're trying to save what's left because there's a lot that's not still here. On the 4 meetings, this is just another complaint, but they always schedule these meetings 10 to 12 during the day. City manager can probably make it. Most of us can't that have regular jobs. It's just a comment. That's an ongoing frustration with the 4 meetings. So a lot of them are during the day. You can't get out there unless you take off from work, and that's hard if you're a teacher. Just to back up what Doug was saying, and I was just thinking about the specifics. As we get into this, please really look at the specifics of the funding, which is a lot of us talk about the JPA and funding and all that. And I just remember back there at one point was a lot of consternation about getting into a JPA for Monterey Bay Community Power, and this looks to be potentially, we're talking about a lot more money than anything we ever talked about with the Monterey Bay Community Power. And at least it seems like it is. So really be careful, please, on those specifics. And I'm trying to dig into it, but as you guys know better than I do because you've done more, it's hard. There's a lot going in there, but that's something we need to be careful. Cost and the revenues. Where's that money coming from? And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the changes in the incidental take permits, the benefit of doing it all as one, as opposed to what we're currently doing where developers are more responsible for compliance. But I would just encourage you, please keep digging, because there's a lot of the different things we set through, not just tonight, which is very good, but we've set through several of these, and some reading that comes up in the papers occasionally, you read about it. There's just a lot of questions out there, and you just hear tonight already. So thank you, but thank you for your time. Please keep digging.
Thank you.
Ask those hard questions.
Katie Krieger. Can the HMP continue without a JPA after FORA? Can you just clarify that for me? Or does it splinter into individual jurisdiction?
So if there is no JPA, each individual city or the county or the agency, like Monterey Peninsula College, is responsible for implementation of their habitat management program. So Delray Oaks would be responsible for its own. It would have to have its funding on its own, and that would happen regardless. So if there's no JPA, that's what would happen next. And then if there was future development they wanted to pursue, they would have to apply for an individual permit from the federal and state agencies in order to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments, questions? We have our experts here. All right, I'll come back. Yes, please.
It's not a comment per se, but the BRAC office and FORA do tours of Fort Ord. There's one coming up this Saturday. Actually, it's 2 of them. Buses that's out on off of 8th. So you go down Giggling to 8th, take a left, and go on Joe Lloyd Drive. They'll signs out. The buses leave at 10 and at 11:45. The February one, the spring, this one is generally, I've been on it, it's generally what they've done for cleanup of the air and the soil and the water plumes, the polluted water plumes. They also will do in the spring, in May, a walking tour into the impact area, so you can see some of these plants.
You can go
and they'll
with
be
Erin.
flowering. And then in July, there's a bus tour that goes through the impact area. So I highly encourage you to go see what we're talking about. Thank you.
My last question is, how do people, so the dates didn't make sense to me because you said people can still submit comments, but I thought I saw a December end date?
So the comment period for the environmental impact report and the environmental impact statement has concluded.
Got it.
That's done. If the HCP is re-released, or if it's not, that comment period would open up again if there is an adjustment to that. But at this point, and I want to mention too for the folks, because I know everybody works, and it's hard to get out for these meetings, and frankly, a lot of people just don't like going to meetings. They have other things they'd like to do. But these meetings are also captured on audio files with minutes and everything else. You can follow along online, and there's nothing to prevent you from, sending a question or a comment or a concern that can be shared either through Councilman Gagliotti or through Mr. Pick or the mayor. So feel free to ask those questions, because we agree you need to have confidence in the decision that you make. So we want you to have as much information as possible and be as well educated as possible moving forward. So comment period closed. They have not responded to the comments yet, because the FORA board has to make the determination of whether or not they're going to move to the final environmental impact report or hold on that action pending some additional revisions to the HCP, or it could be one or the other.
So at this point, there's no on-the-record comments. It's simply to educate yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just would like to add, yes, the official comment period closed on the 16th. However, CEQA lead agencies, when they make the decision to approve the project and or certify the environmental impact report, will be taking comments during a public hearing. And there are, you can provide written comments before then. It's their responsibility to consider all the information up to the point of approval, which is, to me, it's important for public transparency, but it's unfortunately also used as what we call in the industry as a late hit, a paper dump, where we'll get hundreds of pages of comments the day of a hearing that we have to respond to. And it makes it, when there's opposition to a project, makes our jobs a little difficult. But it's important to stay open to the public, and it's not that you don't have an opportunity to comment because it's not December 15th. You'll have plenty of time to participate in the process as it moves forward.
Great, thank you. Any last comments, questions? Please.
Thank you. So just a couple of closing thoughts. This is going to take time, and it's complicated, and we absolutely need to provide our policymakers with the right information to make the best decisions they can. There are, however, decisions that are getting a lot of consensus around the working group that will allow us to continue to preserve, to use a military term, decision space. In other words, it will leave our options open to be able to do the due diligence, do the homework, and come back to our policymakers to prepare them. Those decisions include adoption of the environmental impact report and the environmental impact statement once they come before the FORA board. Adoption of those documents only preserves decision space, only allows us flexibility, whereas the opposite closes off decision space, closes off your options as a jurisdiction going forward, number one. Number two, the establishment of a joint powers authority with very defined authorities, very defined powers to continue the discussion, to continue to develop what it is that should or should not be ultimately adopted by jurisdiction councils around the area, similarly keeps your decision space open. Whereas no JPA by June 30th absolutely closes off decision space. It is a decision. It's a decision not to proceed. It's a decision to default to HMP. Conversation's over. So there are things that are coming into clarity for us that preserve our ability to continue to study, continue to inform, so that policymakers can make the best decisions possible.
Great. Can I just ask, so legally, in that decision space, if there were a lawsuit, who would be responsible? The JPA?
A lawsuit about what, when?
I don't know.
There's so many issues.
Inevitable, yeah. I mean, it is inevitable, and so I want to make sure we understand kind of which space and who's.
So the decision space for the JPA, right? And this is just to have that conversation going forward, right? That JPA would not have a liability necessarily for the environmental impact report or anything, or any suit therein, right?
Okay.
If the JPA moves forward with the implementation of the HCP and there's a lawsuit on the HCP, because the agencies are the beneficiaries of that document, they would defend. Now, the good news on that is that the formation of a JPA would have a shield for each of the agencies, so no one, or none of the agencies would be individually liable, like wouldn't hit your general fund, anything like that. It would potentially negatively impact the endowment or other things. I think that's one of the reasons that we've, and I think member H's are kind of moving, I don't want to speak for them, but I think that's one of the reasons why people really want to make sure that that HCP is buttoned down, because when it has information in it that most agencies know to be not as accurate as it could be, and for no fault of anybody, it's just the timing of how this thing came together. This would give opportunity to fix those things that need to be fixed, determine what the actual cost of implementation would be, and then make that decision. But the interim JPA would not have a liability for the environmental documents.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, can you just, please?
So just to piggyback on what you were saying, I'm a little unsure of something. So when we were trying to join Monterey Bay Community Power, there was a lot of argument that even though there was a shield in the JPA, that there could potentially be liability despite that. Do you remember that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we ensure that a shield like this, because we're such a small municipality, our cannabis sales are taking a dip right now, and so we need to be extremely cautious about this.
And, you know, and frankly, we, every jurisdiction needs to be cautious about those sort of things, right? No, well, nobody has money to waste, and some agencies, specifically, you know, yours, you have cash now. You want to keep your cash. You don't want to give your cash away to attorneys and stuff. Not except for you're good. But my point being that you write the articles of the Joint Powers Authority with a very specific and narrow purpose, right? So in this case, sometimes when you form a Joint Powers Authority, let's say you're going to take on water or other things, there's a lot of moving parts to that which have different types of opportunity for lawsuit, right? But if the sole purpose of this JPA is just to have an ability to hold meetings, you know, to be able to have discussion, your liability is so limited because you're not really doing anything other than taking on a conversation. The minute you switch to say we're going to implement this HCP, or another alternative, and again, I'm not saying this will happen, but it could. What if the phase one comes back and it says, okay, we've got enough money in this endowment and what we're looking at to have a JPA implement the HMP. In other words, share those costs across. That's a possibility. I mean, there's some different scenarios. Sure. So you have these phases, right? You have these phases. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm just saying they got to look at it. But let's say that first phase comes out, picking a number, 25 million. We know that there's 16, 17 million in the endowment. We know that Marina has got $12.5 million in developer fees that we know are coming that are already locked in. Between those two things, now we're up to 25 million, whether Seaside plays or not. Is that enough money to fund the first phase of the Habitat Conservation Plan? And the way we're looking at it is that first phase is likely implementation of what's required in the HMP, plus those projects like Dina was mentioning that may be occurring in the first 15 years. And if you only did that first phase, you wouldn't have to have the endowment for everything else. You just go to that point. And then if something else were to happen down the road where the economic, who knows, the economic area changes, our economy changes, all kinds of things, we never really know. It then can adapt to that and be modeled moving forward. And another thing to keep in mind, the HCP, even if it is adopted in phases, it is also possible and completely common to go back to the regulatory agencies and update it and say, hey, we thought we were going to develop, 1,000 homes. It's only going to be 500. Or conversely, let's say that laws change in California and they say, we're going to allow higher densities, so now our unit count's going to go up, but our acreage is going to go down. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can change. And the way that the law is written is that that HCP can scale to what that is going to be. But I think what everybody wants to make sure of, again, is that whatever you start out with, the agreement between all these agencies, you want it to be something that is realistic and feasible, because you don't want to be in a position where you're underfunded and potentially other funds are at risk, because nobody has money to do that. And that's just kind of the fact of the matter there. I hope that answered your question.
No, that helps.
Okay.
Can we come stand up, please?
One more quick question, more for Dean, I think. So, is this interim JPA, is it envisioned that it's going to have like a sunset on it? I mean, this is not going to be some open-ended sort of thing. Is it basically, we're going to give it a year, 2 years, and if we haven't figured it out, well, we're punting and we're not going to get it? Or it's not an open-ended sort of commitment, correct?
Yeah, honestly, we don't know.
Okay.
Right.
What are you, I guess, what are we maybe envisioning or thinking?
What we're discussing in very sort of initial terms at the moment is the idea of a JPA that would bridge to something that would be determined during that bridge period,
Right.
whatever that bridge period is. And that it may have a sunset, it may have a renewal clause that comes up, or some, we don't know yet. Absolutely. But the idea is, I mean, the idea is not to stay in that mode in perpetuity, because it's to provide time to continue to refine what it is we actually want to implement, and then implement, whether that be the HMP
Right.
or an HCP or whatever it is, and then get to that.
So we've discussed, yeah.
Fair enough.
There's different
Fair enough.
scenarios in the way that could come about. So the discussion part, just the discussion part, is that 60, if you don't have to meet every single week, and I got to tell you, that's crushing on a lot of these agencies. Let's hypothetically, let's say that takes 6 to 8 months. Okay, let them get it right. If at the end of that 8-month period, the decision is, again, not to implement the HCP, but somewhere along the line there, they said, we're going to open up the HCP again. Well, now that group might meet quarterly for another year or a year and a half, because that's how much time it would take to do it. But at each one of these little steps, they would all agree that that's what to do. And the other thing, too, is when you look at the costs associated with the Joint Powers Authority for implementation of the HCP, that includes like overhead and office and all these other things. None of those things are required for this relationship. It is highly likely, if it's done correctly, that you can share you can trade off with the jurisdictions in location. So this should not have a huge fiscal impact. The fiscal impact, as we see it, would be fulfilling direction and answering questions that these folks may come up with, and we would encourage the board, for a board, to allocate adequate funding to address that. And I think that we don't know if that's going to happen yet, but I think that's kind of the way that it's heading in this particular direction.
Wouldn't we have the $16 million for that?
You could, and that's the idea here. We've been meeting with council trying to verify that, because it is related. But what we are hoping is that if there's a set aside for, and I use the number, could be $500,000, it could be $100,000, I don't know, but a set aside that's for that purpose. And once the resolution has been reached by that group to either move forward with an HCP or not, then the rest of those funds, as per the agreement or the statute for the state, either get distributed back to all the member agencies, or that JPA amends its charter, amends what its scope is, and then the funds transfer in. And in the meantime, hopefully they're in a really high interest-bearing account.
Mr. Gagliotti.
Yeah, to kind of Gary's concern, the interim, no one has an appetite for that to languish. Now, the second one that has all the overhead and that manages, that has a very likelihood to just be to live into perpetuity, and there's a vested interest with everybody who would be involved for that to happen. But this interim one, we just want some more time to finish what we're doing. That's it. So the forest going away. That's the only thing we're asking for.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank both Aaron and Kendall for coming and presenting a complicated... Thank you. And I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of you over the next couple of months. Okay, so we're going to move on to new business, letter B, consider RGS scope of work for project management. I'll turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The issue before you is to consider authorization for the city manager to sign a professional services agreement for project management services with Regional Government Services, RGS, based on the attached scope of work for a dollar amount not to exceed $150,000. The genesis of this agenda item is essentially the sunset of FORA, the workload generated by that sunset, and frankly, the limited staff we have here to get it done. And so we are fortunate in that, as you, I think, just saw a master class in, to have consultants that are steeped in the issues that we need help with. And so let me just briefly go over the rationale for this scope of work. First of all, it normally, on something of this dollar amount with this kind of complexity, we would go out to bid, put an RFP out, and get proposals and response. We did not do that in this case for very deliberate reasons, and I want to cover those. First of all, the city has an existing contract with RGS already for human resources professional services. The city is very satisfied with both the quality of the service and the cost of the service. RGS, as I mentioned, specifically Kendall and Steve Flint, have been under contract with FORA and been working the issues that we need help with for the past year plus. They are fully up to speed on the matters and would hit the ground running. The city would benefit enormously from their existing subject matter knowledge, and this is an important point, rather than paying a consultant to learn. It happens all the time in government. We pay consultants to learn, and at some point, they start to add value. These guys come already moving at a sprint on the treadmill, which is awesome. Reimer and Associates, whose sole employee is Christy Reimer, who also works with FORA as a consultant and has dealt with the city, also has a very deep knowledge of subject matter, and we looked at them. We looked at her. Her father did some of the initial surveys on our property. She, I think, was raised on our property in terms of understanding it. She has an incredible depth of knowledge. Here's the issue there. More expensive hourly rate and no bandwidth. She's one employee and she's absolutely loaded to bear. So we looked at that and discarded it as a viable option to consider. The purchasing ordinance provides for exceptions to the competitive bidding process, specifically when entering into an agreement with another public agency. RGS is a public agency. It is a joint powers authority comprised of public agencies. And finally, given what we know, doing an RFP would take staff time and it would cost money, and it is my studied opinion on the matter that it would be a waste of money. It would not benefit us to go through that process when we know what we have here. Having said all of that, the staff recommendation is that council consider approving the attached scope of work and authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with RGS for that scope for an amount not to exceed $150,000. The last point I'd like to make is that another option here would have been to hire an employee. I am convinced that this is temporary workload. So hiring an employee does not make sense in terms of handling what I believe to be 6 to 8 months of surge work, which will taper down into something far less than the surge for the long term. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. We'll go out to the council. Any questions, comments?
No, not right now. Thank you.
Those are good points. I think a wise decision, and I don't like paying people to learn how to do the work. And I think she's proven herself. I've seen her in action.
I'd like to make a, Please.
You know, this is some very valid points, paying somebody to learn a job that doesn't make any sense. We're also, as far as putting it out for bids and working it through, in addition to the cost involved in that, we don't have the time.
Exactly.
We're already swamped, and it's going to just get worse in the next 6 months. And then hopefully, at the end of 8 months, and the contract is for up to a year, at the end of the year, calendar year, hopefully, if not sooner, we'll have it down to a dull roar, and we'll have also learned something along the way.
I mean, I think we've all seen how effective Kendall is. I mean, and there really is, I think she's worth every penny in this. And I've watched Kendall actually wrangle both the admin committee and the entire floor board, and has done that quite effectively, which has been amazing. So I think this is, we should do this without any question.
All right, I'm going to go out to the public. Any comments?
Hi, I jumped up because I really need to get my kid to bed, so nothing personal or anything. Excuse me. Alexis Bunton, Portola Drive. What?
You didn't have to elbow me.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to ask the question I was going to ask before. I just have a question of you guys. And first, I want to thank our city manager for making something so complex understandable. Really appreciate it. And you answered like all my questions, and really great job. So for RGS, can you guarantee that we'll be able to get all done that we want to in the contract period? Because you did such a good job. You're obviously our field experts, hands down, but you did a really good job scaring me for like what happens after FORA expires. So I'm worried, you know, there's a lot that you want to get done that you're proposing. And then when you talked about how, the JPA has an unknown amount of time, it would be enforceable. All that's really scary, and our city's really risk averse, and I know the mayor just mentioned something. Yeah, do you think you can get it done? And then I have a quick yes/no question for the mayor.
So a couple things. First of all, don't be scared. It's okay. It's okay. So one of the things I think is interesting about RGS, and just our friend Steve, who's sitting there going, why do you talk? I don't like talking. So you just do that. We tag team on a lot of these things for agencies that are frankly in distress. In other words, when usually we get called in, it's because there's a lack of staffing, or there's just challenges with multiple projects. So what we really do is we try to serve as a resource to the city manager and to the council. So everything that you saw on that list are a variety of things that we know are coming up. There are others, I'm going to just brush by it, but as an example, we managed the turnaround for the city of Atwater, which was also on the Hot 100 list for the Joint Legislative Audit Committee at the state, and we helped them overcome and not do an audit and turn them around, right? So our expertise goes into finance, goes into project management. Steve's background is in land use and project management for infrastructure, roadways. We also do water, rate, impact, whatever that might be, including ballot measures and that kind of thing, which we've won. So we've got this very bizarre little toolbox of things we do. So our anticipation is that the council and the city manager will select for us those things they want us to concentrate on. And then the way we work is we do regular update reports so that you'll be able to see what we're working on, where we are with it. Do we do everything on that list? Highly unlikely. We're probably going to take, a few of those things at a time and chunk them off. The good news is that, as Dino mentioned, you want to talk about trial by fire. Spend some time with FORA. It's a very eye-opening experience. But we're also doing work here in the county for TAMC. We're doing roadway project. In fact, we did the 68. I don't know how many of you saw that a few years back, but we managed that outreach program and worked on that one. We're also doing things like homeless issues. We're doing impact fees. So I think that the fit was really good. Plus, we love the community, which is nice, and it means that we just spend more time down here. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. But just quick question for the mayor, and then I got to run home and be in trouble. Was the funds for this already planned for in our annual budget for this year? And if not, why is such a surprise right now? And I'm just going to kind of...
I'm going to turn that over to our city manager.
Thank you. So, great question, Alexis, and the answer is that the $150,000 will come from our projected ending fund balance. So we had projected at the end of this fiscal year to have $500,000-$600,000, even after, and we're going to present this in February with the mid-year budget, even with this expense and some additional expenses in other areas, land use and planning and legal, and with the reduction in cannabis tax, we're still going to project a surplus. It's going to be much smaller, but we're not going to run a negative budget. So the answer to your question is it'll come from the ending fund balance.
Any other public comments?
Hello, Doug Burton again. I live up on Paloma. A couple of things came to mind. First of all, I would, just on my limited observations of the work that's getting presented, it sounds like you definitely have a quality group to take care of some of these investigations, which leads me to the question and maybe a couple of them. First of all, what's this project that we're going to ask to manage, or projects that we're going to ask to manage?
It's a great question. So the scope of work that's attached here has basically a menu, Doug, of tasks or projects that I am unable to get done.
Okay.
And so their work will come from that list based on prioritization and kind of interaction with me.
And that was my second question, is these things that you're going to investigate, are they pushing out other priorities that we should be chasing with that $150K? And it sounds like, I don't want to answer the question for you, are we chasing out other priorities that we should be chasing with that money?
It's a reduction in our ending fund balance, which means it's a reduction in the amount of money that the council may have had other options with at the end of the fiscal year, as we have in the past, such as paying down debt, increasing our economic uncertainty fund, and other investments. So it definitely is a trade-off, no question. I think, and again, it's think about it. I strongly believe that this is required to protect the interests of the city so that we're able to continue to grow economically and provide the services to the residents.
Thanks for the hard work. Thanks for the detail. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ken Rutherford, Via Verde. The presentation was excellent, and thank you for that. I guess my question is, what other agencies do you currently represent that are involved in FORA? Are you currently under contract with FORA? And do you not see a potential conflict of interest for us having different interests than these other agencies?
Great question. So our role at FORA is very different. So we are not staffed at FORA. So what happened was that basically, I think on and about like November, December of 2018, when it became apparent that the member agencies were not playing well with each other, they wanted to get an objective third party in there to look at things. So we're not advocating one way or the other for anything with FORA. All we do is help facilitate those discussions and chase down the information that they want. So our role was never, go FORA or sunset FORA, but more in line with, if you take these steps, these are the things that happen next. Now, where it gets interesting is that we would not, as part of this contract, we would not negotiate or actually be the attorney. We would not negotiate the TPI, the transition. I can't believe that's what my brain's going. Transition implementing agreements that will be coming out of FORA. That will be something that will come to the city of Delray Oaks. We would not get involved with that from the city's perspective. That would strictly be with the city attorney and through staff. On the flip side, if there was going to be project, and I'm going to use about South Boundary Road. If South Boundary Road was going to come forward and they needed a project manager for that, that's something that Steve would do. And again, that's after the project has transferred out of FORA. So we have no conflict on that. And I think it's also really important to note, we are a public agency. So we are subject to Brown Act. We have 7 cities that are on our board of directors. We go to them. We do no work for the development community whatsoever. We don't do any private types of pieces. We are exclusively contracted with other public agencies at all times. So we don't have a dog in the fight.
Or can I just maybe ask, are there any other agencies here that you're representing?
We're with TAMC. I'm working on the 101 South. I don't know if everybody, or you feel like going south of Salinas when the trucks make the left-hand turn and go, ah! We're trying to make that more of a freeway than an expressway, right? So, and then I'm currently also working in the city of Soledad, helping them update their Parks Master Plan. So we do other things.
But not with Fora, not with the Fora agency.
No, that's not this one.
Thank you, Ken.
Good evening, Frederica Jones, Fillmore Place. So, I just had a couple of questions, and whether it's for RGS or Mr. Pitt. In the letter from RGS, it states that the term of the contract would be March 1, 2020 through February 28, 2021. And I see that there's a request for, the exact terminology is initial budget of $150,000. So is it my understanding then that it's $150,000 initial budget for the fiscal year, which our fiscal year ends June 30th, correct? So is that $150,000 for 3 months of work? And then July 1 comes a new fiscal year. Are we then indebted for another $150,000 to get us through the end of February 28th, 2021? And then what happens after that $150,000 is expenditure and we need another $150,000 to get us from March 1 to June 30th of 2021? That is now a $450,000 deficit that I'm sure that the city is not prepared to allocate with the funds that we have. So can you clarify and explain, because there's a difference between their term of contract and what's being presented tonight and extending the sunset from that?
Absolutely. So that is absolutely not what the proposal is, to go to 450,000 at all. The request of the council is to authorize a not to exceed amount up to $150,000 and an initial term of 1 year for the contract. As I said initially, and I will continue to say, my belief is that the surge period is 6 to 8 months. That's when we have a lot of work to do, and that's when I anticipate, frankly, spending a significant portion of that not to exceed amount. Any amount above the $150,000 has to come back to the council with a justification and an approval request. You know, I would truly love to get a lot of this work done for less than that, for less than $150,000. And as I've told the council members individually, and I'll tell the public right now, this is, my goodness, this is not an exact science for me right now. It is a best estimate based on an hourly rate, a large workload, to estimate what it is we might need. And I hope that I've overshot that amount, and time will tell as we start to prioritize the work and we start to knock it out. But just to be crystal clear, the council is being asked to approve $150,000 and not a penny more. And our expectation is to complete a majority of the work with that amount, with most of it being done in the next 6 to 8 months, but with a contract period of 12 months.
Just one last question. As I was reading some of the tasks or the scope of the work that was being submitted by RGS, isn't there many of the items on this that could be delegated to our own very own city attorney to work with the city manager and other review of contracts and negotiating and things like that? Can that not be delegated to our city attorney and not use RGS?
So what we're doing, it's a great question. What we're doing is bringing another arrow into our quiver here. We don't have to use RGS. We don't for all of those tasks. We can potentially, I hope to do a lot of this work by myself and working with the city attorney. I'm convinced to my bones I can't get it done, and that's why we're here. But it's a good question. Can the city attorney review contracts? Absolutely. Will he review contracts that Kendall and Steve may work on? Probably. So we'll be using, it's a team as we operate here with Denise Duffy and Associates and others to get the work done. So and again, I briefed the council members on this, and I'll say it to the public. The scope here and that list is deliberately broad, and it's broad to give me management flexibility to assign tasks as we need and prioritize as we need as this sunset of FORA continues to unfold before us.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie Krieger, how will you be sharing your work that you're doing with the public, that we're hiring you to help support? What is the method of providing that information to the public?
Our normal process, right? So we will be agendizing work when it's ready for council, either updates as information items, as we did tonight with the HCP, or for decisions and action when an agreement is ready for consideration by the council or a contract is ready for approval.
I guess what I'm saying is some of it is lengthy and dense, and it's nice to have that in time so that, since that's not our main job, we have some time to look at it. Is there some way that we can get that information with enough time that a layperson could look through it?
We'll make every attempt.
What would something like that maybe look like under these circumstances? Is there a...
Yeah, I think, so Katie, we're not going to invent a new wheel here, right? So let's take traffic calming, right? We brought in an expert consultant, we had a complex subject, and we looked at how best to engage with the public and how to get it done. And it included, in that case, workshops and
Did we
city
ever
council.
get the, just speaking of that, did we ever get the final results of that? The results of the study?
The traffic engineer still has it.
When are we going to get that?
Let's
sure you want
stay
it?
on the...
You sure you want it?
Well, no, we paid for it. Right?
We need to stay on the topic.
Okay. Well, you
Sorry.
brought it up, so I was like, oh, hey, that's a good question.
Sorry.
But, these are dense documents, and, we're lay people. So what would be a typical response?
If I may, I think one of the things that we do really well is translate planning and translate concept, right?
Kind of put it into a précis form or something?
So in
Okay.
the same way that they do everything else, there will be staff reports that we would assist on the development of the staff report and presentation and all the background information. And what we're trying to do in all cases is demystify the public process.
Yeah.
Demystify the requirements of the law and the requirements for finance. When we're talking about impact. So what are the different options? What are available to you?
Yeah.
What can the council do? What are your requirements by law? So we try to be as transparent as
Sure.
possible. But again, that's going to work through the existing places. And I think that's another thing that we bring to the table is the expertise we have in terms of public meeting facilitation and whatnot. So when we do have those subjects that the city manager wants us to pursue, we can say, hey, here's one where we need to have a meeting at night. So we can
Thank you.
Yeah. And that sort of thing.
Yeah, because, since, we're putting forward this extra money, I feel like, I really want to see, in time to be able to ask questions. So just put that out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Actually, following on the minute of Katie's, maybe you and Kendall kind of mentioned it too. If I didn't see anything in the contract about deliverables, but maybe a monthly, like you were saying, you mentioned the letter, what's been done that month. That might be nice to include. I didn't see it specifically laid out in there, but Anyway, that would be some, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
look.
So anyway, I'm just saying, just something to think about,
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
just to be clear, I mean, look, this is no different, other than dollar amount,
Right.
which is important. This is no different than the agreements that we have with Denise Duffy and Associates.
Right.
That we have with Economic Planning Services, right? And those are professional services that the city uses, and we keep the council informed and we keep the public informed as projects reach a
Unwind.
reach certain milestones. So what I don't want to do is oblige this consultant to provide some kind of report to the council within a contract that is different from any other management practice we have. I think the way to do it is to essentially follow our normal practices.
Quick question for you. So you mentioned 500,000 roughly. You thought, no, we got next, I'm stealing your thunder for next month. In the contract, it talked about you were expecting an ending balance of the 344,000. Does that already take into account the reduced cannabis income? Does it take into account setting aside money for legal fees, that kind of stuff? I'm just curious. I don't need the whole big thing, but
no.
No? Okay. Okay. Thanks. Looking forward to February already.
Any other public? Yes, please.
If I might, the other point I would make is that the work product from the consultants would be subject to the Public Records Act, as would any other city document.
Any other public comment? All right, I'll bring it back to the council. Any?
Yeah, I just want to bring up 3 points that I heard from public comment. One, in terms of, why not just utilize resources within and load up Alex with it? One, it's efficiency. I mean, Kendall knows this stuff Alex is a great attorney, but he doesn't know this stuff as well as Kendall does. So just the efficiency of her to be able to kind of get through any one of these scope items would be there. On the TPIA, I was kind of questioning is that, while I wouldn't expect you to negotiate the TPIA, because most of that negotiation's already been done, but I would expect help, just because,
Well, we would do the same as we're already meeting
Yeah.
with you, and we do
Right.
that for every jurisdiction, so you get that on board as done.
all right, okay, great. All right, I was just thought, no longer, we don't get to you for TPIA.
I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with the person we're potentially contracting with being such a key part of the conversation. I just want to keep it here for now.
I don't know where that's coming from, because it's been kind of the forum the whole night. So, I hear your concern. On the TPI, so the TPI, and then with regard to staff reports, that could be one of the ways to convey this out. And that is, and that's something that you've been very effective at with FORA. So those are my 3 points.
Any other questions? Yes.
I just have a brief comment, just for the record, is that, no, we didn't plan on this, okay? We didn't budget for this, and we also didn't plan that the final FORA extension would die in committee in Sacramento. So, that's life. You don't plan on a rainstorm coming and dropping a tree on your house either, so you just have to kind of roll with it and do the best we can. And I think this is an excellent way of basically taking the punches that we're going to end up getting when FORA goes away.
Mayor, if I might, the question came, why doesn't Alex do some of the stuff? It's because I don't have the qualification to do the legwork and the planning work, but again, this would be sort of, you could think of this as another city employee. In any contract that I would review for Dino or anyone else, I would equally review for the work product of the consultant.
Okay. I have a few comments. I've done some contracting for the DOD, and I think I completely agree that Dino needs expertise, or having access to expertise, especially in the next, yes. And I also agree that I think you guys have the qualifications for that. What I'm hearing is, and it's a timing thing, right? We have a finance committee meeting in a couple of weeks, and we will be giving a presentation on the year-end, anticipated year-end balances. That's just next month. I also personally am a little concerned about the statement of work. I like things a little more identified. I understand the need for flexibility, but there is the whole, everything in the kitchen sink in this contract, so that makes me a little uncomfortable. What I would love to be able to offer is to table this until next month after we have the finance presentations, and then hopefully in the meantime you could tighten up a statement of work. We generally actually have the contract to be able to approve, and I'm not seeing a contract here, and so those are my thoughts on this. I would also love to see a little public outreach included in this because you do it well, and I think these topics deserve it over and over again. They're all complicated, and we have an educated population, but the more the merrier. So I don't know how you feel about that, but that would be my suggestion. Yep, please.
Mayor, those are all great points. Let me just take them in turn. So the budget question is a good one. And what we know, based on our initial staff work, is, as I discussed earlier, is that we will project a positive ending fund balance with this contract and other expenditures that you'll be considering. And so I would say that the need to wait till February, while it may give you more fidelity, I'm comfortable as staff recommending the approval of the contract amount today with a knowledge that we will continue to have a positive ending fund balance, number one. Number two, frankly, time matters at this point. And waiting 30 days will matter. And I'm glad somebody said March 1st, because I had not actually caught that date.
Yeah.
I would actually request that the council approve this with an effective date of February 1st, not March 1st. With regard to the contract, we have an existing RGS contract that the council has reviewed and approved, and that the city attorney has reviewed, and this would be an addition to the scope, so it would be a contract amendment. It would be an addition to scope and an addition to amount to that contract, rather than a new contract vehicle from whole cloth. And so for all of those reasons, and in terms of the other point you made, which was the breadth of the scope, again, it's deliberate. We could pare it down, but we would be doing it artificially, and not out of a management recommendation.
Any other comments?
I move that we accept the staff recommendation, authorize city manager to sign a professional service agreement, make it effective February 1.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, it passes unanimously. You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So we have no correspondence, and we're heading into closed session. Does anyone have any public comment on the closed session? It has to do with the existing litigation between Landwatch, Monterey County, and City of Delray Oaks.
Jim Clark, Delray Oaks, and I just was refreshed in my memory hearing Aaron present that Denise Duffy up here during I think it was last meeting when Landwatch was here and Denise Duffy was here, and Landwatch had an attorney, and Denise basically eviscerated all of his arguments quite effectively at the end of that meeting, which was just amazing to witness. And I think that, as a wise man once said, Landwatch is a bully, and anything we can do to stand to a bully is worth doing.
Thank you, Jim. All right, we're going to adjourn to closed session. Thank you all. Welcome back to open session. Will you please report out?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regard to Land Watch versus City of Delray Oaks, status was provided to the council, and council provided me with direction, but no reportable action was taken.
Thank you. Next meeting date, Tuesday, February 25th, 2020 at 6 o'clock. At that, we're adjourned.